So you made a point about constitution having to recognize the inherent dharma if we are pushing for it.
Right.
And it would have to fall back on the Shastras for it to understand what Dharma is. And Shastras overwhelmingly, they promote monarchy. So is that something you think that Constitution would have to recognize monarchy? Or if Dharma has to refactor itself and project itself on the currently existing democracy, who takes the charge of that refactor, the lawyers or the acharyas? Thank you.
So first thing is the belief that Dharma has prescribed monarchy may be dislodged by the example of the Vrishnis, who existed as a confederacy, not exactly as a monarchy. Okay? So I don't think it's a question of that. I'd rather go with a slightly different approach to it. Since 2014, ours has morphed into a presidential form of election one way or the other, where you're voting for an individual more than a party. Right? There are times that there are several people who may not vote for the party had it not been for the same figure standing at the top. And precisely because the other side has absolutely no options to offer. Right? And each of those options are malicious, diabolical, anti-dharmic, and therefore anti-Bharat. Now, therefore, I don't think fixation on on monarchy is something that has to do with it. It is possible to look at structural systems. Here is where I will find a square inch area of meeting ground with someone who I don't believe are dharmics, the Charvakas. I don't think of them as dharmics at all. They have no role. They are not to be treated as dharmics, and they cannot have a say whatsoever when it comes to the course of dharma or the treatment of dharmic institutions, much less on what needs to be treated as reform for dharmic institutions. The Charvaka does not believe in moksha, and therefore he cannot speak of an institution that puts faith in moksha. He is an existentialist. He comes as close as possible to a Hindu Marxist. He is not to be discussed. And he is not to be heard in this equation. The only thing that I'm interested in asking is, if the essence is this, in protection of the core, what structure can I come out with in the current day which propagates, advances the cause of the protection of the core? And assuming that the Constitution or the concept of a constitution, and therefore constitutionalism, is here to stay, then how do I use this document to further that particular goal? And in that sense, can we look at more options where one of the requirements for appointment to an elected position or a constitutional position is the subscription to the concept of dharma as a form of the oath itself? Then I'm looking at people who will have no other option but to swear allegiance by dharma. And I again repeat, dharma is not religion. Okay? I will simply call it as the onto-politico-socio-theological experience of this land. That's how I would want to loosely define it. I am no authority, I am no expert. The second part of your question, lawyers give too much credit to themselves. No wonder the judiciary asserts independence over all other forms of organs, right? I would rather go with a situation where I seek the guidance of dharmic scholars who understand dharmic statecraft and then serve or use lawyers as bridges to get the job done from a contemporary perspective without using the word modernity or modern perspective. The need of the hour is someone like me who is interested in achieving that end has no dharmic training, and someone who has dharmic training has no way of making himself, let's say, heard or relatable to a modern statecraft audience or a contemporary statecraft audience. Therefore, where is the bridge that effectively gulfs, or let's say that builds, or gulfs this chasm, that closes this chasm and says, okay, this is how you talk to each other. The handshake is in spurts, because half the time I'm trying to look for English translatables for Sanskrit terms, which will never be complete. And in fact, the number of papers that I've seen where they try and wrap their heads around the word dharma in English itself is proof of the fact that there are multiple untranslatables to put it in the words of a person who I don't get along with, who has written a book on untranslatables, right? Now, therefore, we start with Brit scholarship in the hope that more and more lawyers will feel the need, and especially constitutional lawyers, feel the need to draw from our own sources when they speak of constitutionalism. That is something that is sorely missing today. Anybody who does that, who attempts to do that, is branded as a saffron brigand, unfortunately. So, I would want to consult the acharyas. But there is also an important aspect here that unfortunately today, certain realities of how the state operates, and you're also looking at international considerations because Bharat is not an island, either geographically or otherwise. Those realities may not be entirely relatable to someone who's practicing only the Anushtana. One of the reasons is our own religious institutions have stopped being societal institutions from the perspective of politics, because they're constantly being told, you step into politics, I'll take away your land. I'll start pressing charges against you. I'll prop someone who effectively calls the legitimacy of your position in question, who will say that this pontiff should not have been appointed in the first place, he is a usurper to the post. So the state creates all sorts of foisted litigation to shut up only our people. But when it comes to others, they don't do that. There is a fetter that's been imposed on the state which has had the effect of a chilling effect on the free speech of our acharyas. So of all the so-called people, let's say of all the people who pursue their faith systems, it's only the Hindu acharyas who are most reticent when it comes to making their voices heard on political issues or societal issues because of the treatment that the Hindu state gives to them or the Indian state gives to them. So there are people on Twitter who say, why don't our gurus speak up on this? Are you serious? Do you know how the state actually threatens them? And no state is an exception to that. They're literally held hostage to their own mathas. Only in the last few years, they've managed to speak up gradually. So one of the, let's say, condition precedents to arrive at what you're asking for is greater participation of temples and mathas openly in political discussions and social discussions, because that is not barred under the Constitution. If politics has an impact on societal institutions and religious institutions, can you expect them not to have a voice in that particular process? Impossible. Next.
Next question. There. The lady there.
Hello. Good evening, sir.
Namaste.
Namaste. Jai Sri Rama.
Jai Sri Ram.
I'm a person who believes that we have to uphold the Vedas if we want to, sustain the current scenarios and to uphold the Sanatana Dharma. But my question is, in the current scenario, where we do not indulge in the Varna profession from which Varna we are coming in, and where I don't see any V1 group has any interest in learning Vedas, should that be open to learning Vedas?
Very
should
good
it
question.
be opening to everybody who's interested, or it should be only hereditary?
Okay.
And also extending this question to intercaste marriage, where we will talk about Pitru Devatas and their alignment, everything. This is my question. I'm a person who completely believe that we need to withhold Vedas. And we have to uphold Gayatri Mantra that protects the Vedas.
Understood.
Yes. Yeah. This is my question, sir.
So the interesting part is, at least since the explosion of the internet and information on the internet, I haven't seen anybody stopping anybody from learning the Vedas. And still it so happens that only a particular group seems to be showing interest in learning the Vedas, without any social incentive, economic incentive. In fact, there is a greater social disincentive to learning the Vedas openly. Right? So this This false narrative needs to be busted. There are certain people sitting on Twitter who call themselves coming from the Hindu right and who subscribe to these kind of false notions. Effectively, on these topics, they are no different from the left and the Marxists. Both of them say the very same thing. Conveniently, each of them has their own justifications for coming after the Brahmin. I would say at least I will respect the leftist in that particular sense because I know he's an open enemy. These are people sitting inside within the camp and still constantly bash Brahmins. These are the people who must be gone after first. I'm saying this bluntly, whoever they may be. Second, one of the things about our way of life is, assume for a moment that V2, V3 and V4 were to start the pursuit of the Veda. Are you really telling me that the Brahmin today has the political muscle or other muscle to stop them from doing so? No. No, they don't. At least hereditary Brahmins don't. Vaidika Brahmins are a micro minority. They don't, right? The argument to be made when it comes to this, and this is exactly what is different from us, let's say, between us and others, is that we say, you disagree with a particular system. Don't change that institution, you set up a parallel universe. Okay? Arya Samaj, for all practical purposes, says, does and believes a lot of things which, let's say, Vaidika Brahmins may or may not agree with. I'm not passing a value judgment, I'm giving a statement of fact, right? Now, what do you ultimately leave it to? If you're able to find traction, and if you can convince people that you're the right way, go ahead, do it. You don't change me, you don't change my institution. So someone wants to do this, I'd say go set up temples, which are non-agamic in that particular sense. But those temples which are based on Shastras and Agamas cannot be interfered with because you cannot interfere with the Agama under any circumstances. I will not stop the construction of non-agamic institutions and temples because there are Arya Samaj mandirs which do not subscribe to Agamas. You come to Punjab, you come to Delhi, there are, in fact, most weddings are Arya Samaji weddings, for God's sakes. Abhishek Bachchan married Aishwarya Rai in an Arya Samaji wedding. I wasn't invited, I know. But I'm telling you this. Now, who is stopping them? Do you know that these days, Arya Samaji weddings are being officiated by female priestesses wearing the Janevu? Is anybody going after them and stopping them? Nobody is doing that. Because as I said, Sharia demands compliance. We basically say, this is what I recommend. You want to do. If you don't, ni karma ante. Right? If there is meant to be a consequence for what you have done, it will have. I am nobody to interfere with it. I am only saying, don't bring your reformist nonsense into my institution and ask me to divorce my allegiance to the Agama. That's all I'm asking for. Right? Now, frankly, after having interacted with the Vaidika community in several parts of the country, I am not hopeless. I have nothing but admiration for the circumstances and the conditions that they work in. Unbelievable. Someone I know very closely, 2 generations ago, were in secular professions under the guidance and instructions of Mahaparivar Sri Chandrasekhara Saraswati. They gave up the secular professions altogether. And they said, all of us will pursue the pursuit of Veda. We'll run a Goshala. We will educate ourselves in this so-called modern English education through open universities so that the better part of our time is spent in mastering the Vedas. And I said this on a podcast recently. 8-year-old was teaching a 10-year-old, a 10-year-old was teaching a 13-year-old, a 13-year-old was being taught by a 15-year-old. This is how the hierarchy works there. And you know what they do? Despite the meager income that they make, they know that they'll need at least one person to carry this tradition forward. And therefore, they actually have a better TFR than educated Hindus, or let's say secularized English educated Hindus. Because it is under their compulsion and their commitment to keeping the tradition alive that they say we need at least 2 or at least 3, and we need to make sure that this goes forward under any circumstances. This is how they operate. And families of 10 and 12 survive on a regular income of one person. This cunning evil snake can pursue greener pastures in California. Why is he here? Which of these V2, V3 and V4 are coming and saying, we will support you, go ahead, do this? Why? Even the anglicized Mylapore based V1, who is helping them? They are doing it on their own. Because they are living out the Gita in action. This is what I am expected to do, I will do, independent of success or failure, period. Next.
Yeah, Sriram.
Last question.
Yeah, last question. Sriram Kari in front from the Deccan Chronicle.
Namaste.
Namaste, Sai Deepak. You sound better in person than on YouTube.
Oh, okay. Do I look better or not?
I wanted to understand
Yes.
within the recesses of your mind, how does Sanatan Dharma and Bharat link in the sense, if you had to save one, sacrificing the other, would you save the Sanatan Dharma and sacrifice Bharat? Or would you save Bharat or India and sacrifice the Dharma?
It's a beautiful question, and I'll relate it to my own personal experience, and I'll connect it to the works of
Mike Kavalan.
Radha Kumud Mukherjee and Majumdar in a slightly different sense. You have to read them for their understanding of the importance of geography. So let me explain this. So when you start practicing your Nitya Karma, and if you happen to be someone who is traveling on a regular basis, you're not going to be provided the best of circumstances to follow it to the T always. So the rule is 100% when you're at home, 75% at your relative's place, 50% at a friend's place, and 25% in enemy territory. More or less, that seems to be the equation. That means home is where you get to practice dharma 100%. Particularly when you happen to be a literally rooted faith. Its teachings are universal. Please don't discount it. I am not taking away the universalism of our teachings. But it certainly has a lodestone, a mothership, an epicenter, namely Bharat. Okay. Now the question that you're asking me to answer is an eventuality, which is if Hindus were to face the same situation as the Jews during the Roman period and we were forced to exile and we were forced to run away, or the closer home experience of the Kashmiri Pandits from Kashmir, what do you do then? Well, although it's a huge loss, because this is the bhumi that is associated with all your itihasas and puranas, and therefore all the consecrated spaces, the Shaktipithas, the Jyotirlingas and whatnot, the gatekeepers, namely Badri and Travancore of our borders, what do you do then? It is Sanatana Dharma, it will still have to find a way to exist. And no wonder it is finding, let's say, people who are embracing it in Russia and other places. That is perhaps proof of the fact that, yes, this too is possible. But am I going to therefore use that as an example to say that this is the default position? In logic, you never use an extreme situation to judge the validity of a proposition in the median. It makes really no sense. Because the logic of peacetime is different from the logic of wartime. It can't be the same. Right? If it comes to that, and if that unfortunate eventuality ever happens, my answer would be Dharma is your only remaining psychological connect to Bharata, and therefore hold on to Dharma. And that's exactly what the NRIs do when they go there. They try to recreate it as much as possible. They're not just recreating a mental faith. They're trying to recreate the ambience. They're trying to recreate the space itself. And that is why Radha Kumud Mukherjee and R.C. Majumdar insist on the importance of a geography as a karma bhumi to fulfill your dharma. And they also use this as the basis to say that's why the concept of a Bharata has always existed. Well before the British man set foot because we have treated this as the place to work out our dharma. I genuinely hope that the energy that you have just cast out in the universe dissipates without a trace. I'm grateful. Thank you so very much for the patient hearing.